How did Shiva acquire his third eye? There are a couple main stories in Indian mythology. The first one is a variation of the creation myth. So in the beginning was Adya, or Adi Para Shakti, the one transcendent goddess. So in Hinduism, when at first glance it looks like there's many gods and goddesses, 3 million, but they all represent personalities, attributes, or characteristics of the one god or goddess. So in India, they refer to it as a goddess in the feminine sense, as creation is primarily a feminine quality. So the goddess, the one transcendent goddess, Adi Para Shakti, she created Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. The creator, Brahma, the sustainer, Vishnu, and Shiva, the destroyer. So first off, I'm not a big fan of the term destruction because in English we then imply annihilation, that there's nothing left over. So nothing is ever really destroyed. It just transforms from one energy state into another. So I think of Shiva as the cosmic recycler or the deconstructor. He takes things apart and then he puts them back together again. So we all have those three qualities within us. So the 3 million gods represent the qualities, the attributes, characteristics of the one primary god or goddess. But all of the gods and goddesses simply represent aspects of our own subconscious or energies that we can align ourselves with to build and develop within ourselves. So we all have the power of the creator, sustainer, and deconstructor within us. For example, you can create a post on social media, you can sustain it on your feed, or you can delete it or take it down and edit it and then repost. You can create a piece of art, you can sustain it by hanging it on your wall or on your refrigerator, or you can just crumple it up and throw it away, destruction. Or you could take it down and refine it and then recreate it. So really it's creation, sustainment, taking things apart, reorganizing them, putting them back together so that the creation process starts again. So it's creation, sustainment, dissolution, and then recreation, coming back together as a new energy. So this is also represented by the sacred chant of Om. So the first sound, the Ah, is the opening up, the creative potential. The U is the sustainment of the energy of the vibration. The is the trailing off, the dissolution, but it is really a present participle, just like we say something is happening, the ing. So it's a continuation of the energy. So creation, sustainment, dissolution, and then it starts again, the process. So it's cyclical in nature. All right, back to the story. So we have Adya, or Adi Parashakti, and she has created the trinity of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And she wants a partner. She wants a consort, so she goes to Brahma first, and she's not in her beautiful, radiant expression. She's in her dark, scary, wrathful, hideous expression like Chamunda or Kali. And she goes to Brahma, and she's like, hey, will you be my partner? And Brahma is like terrified. He's like, no. And so he turns away from her, so because he doesn't want to look. It's like a terrifying sight. And so he turns away from her in fear. Then she goes to Vishnu, and she's like, will you be my partner? And Vishnu closes his eyes and withdraws and goes into meditation. Then she goes to Shiva, and she says, will you be my partner? And Shiva locks eyes with her, and he says, yes, on the condition that you give me your third eye. And she says, okay. So she plucks it out, and she gives it to Shiva. Shiva puts it in his forehead, and then he uses it to create a laser, and he fries the goddess or burns her into a great pile of ash. So From that pile of ash then arises the trinity of the goddesses of Durga, Lakshmi, and Saraswati. So they represent three energies that we can build within us or attract within our life. Durga is self-empowerment, Lakshmi is acquiring wealth, and Saraswati is acquiring knowledge. So the goddess of learning, the goddess of abundance, and the goddess of strength and empowerment. Saraswati, Lakshmi, and Durga. So this is a story that shows that the one primary goddess, first out of her own energy, created the male trinity of energies that we innately have within us already, the energies of creation, sustainment, and dissolution, the energies of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And then her energy was dissolved and then transformed into three goddess energies, energies that then we can acquire in our lives. So we can acquire learning through watching YouTube videos, through reading books, listening to podcasts. And then from that learning, we can apply it into our career out in the world that will attract abundance, it will attract wealth. And then we use our learning, we use our wealth to create self-empowerment. So we have the ability to acquire the energies of the goddess while we have the energies of the Trinity within us of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Another story of how Shiva acquired his third eye is he was sitting in meditation in a deep trance, and the goddess Parvati came up behind him, and she thought she would be playful, and she covered his eyes with her hands. So by doing so, since Shiva is also considered the one God, so he is also considered the creator, the sustainer, and the deconstructor, even if the Trinity labels him as the destroyer. You got to work with this a little bit. I know it's confusing. So Shiva, the one God, got plunged into darkness, so his world, inner world became more dark, and since his inner world led to the creation of the outer world was filled with darkness and ignorance. And from that darkness, Shiva had to raise his awareness, to connect to his higher self, and he opened his third eye. So thus he became illuminated yet again, and the world regained its light. But by her covering the eyes with her hands, she also created heat within Shiva. And it is the heat that was created in Shiva by the covering of his eyes that led to him to start to perspire and sweat. So the sweat hit the ground, and since it was created by the energy of Parvati over him, and it created more heat within him, and that heat led to him sweating. And when it hit the ground, it became a young boy known as Andhaka. And so Parvati insisted that this boy was theirs because it came from their energies. And the thing is the boy was born blind and as an albino. So he was also born into darkness, which spiritually signifies that he had lots of avidya, of ignorance, the collective energies of the ego. So Andhaka was born into spiritual ignorance associated with egoic energies, and he was not able to rise up to self-illumination, to connect to his higher self. So Andhaka became an asura, a self-serving demon.
The demons of Hinduism aren't necessarily demonic. They are simply self-serving, and they want more knowledge, more wealth, more control and power for themselves instead of sharing it with others. Just like the Sith Lords from Star Wars, who also want more power, more control, and more influence. In contrast, the Devas are out to uplift everyone, to share knowledge, to share wealth and power with others. Eventually, Andhaka became the leader of the Asuras, and his army overthrew heaven, and he became the king of heaven, which shows that the ego is never satisfied until it has everything. Thus, the ego is a blinding force, controlling many people in society, controlling their motivations, their desires, their intentions. It is easy to forget our true essence as beings of light and spirit when we are being pulled out of ourselves by our phones, by our jobs, our relationships, all the places we have to go and things we have to see. It is hard to take time to turn back within, to come back into remembrance in recognition. We are beings of spirit, free, independent, and self-directed.
So Andhaka became the inner asura, an inner demon that could be present within all of us. So when we ignore or we don't cultivate the energies of our higher self, when we ignore the spiritual world or spiritual practices, then the energies of the ego build within us. We have spiritual ignorance, vanity, pride, arrogance, all build within the system. Metaphorically, we all do battle with our own inner asura, our own Andhaka, when we work on transforming any negative, life-negating energies into life-affirming, positive energies. So the story goes on that Andhaka wanted more power, so he started to do lots of tapasya. He started to create more inner heat within himself through austere spiritual practices, and he was granted a boon from Brahma, the creator. And Brahma says, "What do you want?" And he says, "Well, I want to be immortal." And he says, "Well, you can't be immortal, but you can be close to that. So you can only be defeated if you experience lust for your own mother." So since Andhaka was born blind, he really had no idea who his parents were, but he heard lots of stories about how beautiful Parvati was and that she was the fairest, most beautiful woman around. So he started to have lots of desires for Parvati. So it is from those desires that made him vulnerable, and then Shiva was able to defeat him in battle. But Shiva wasn't able to defeat him right away so swiftly. So every time Shiva impaled him with the trident and he started to bleed, blood would hit the ground, and then that blood would become another Andhaka. So this is very similar to the story of Raktabija and Kali in that battle, where the demon's blood would just create another demon. So the stories are similar because you can't kill your ego. If you try to kill your ego, it's just going to come back stronger like a hydra. It's just going to be a serpent with an extra head. So even the desire to kill your ego is an egotistical desire. You may succeed in suppressing your ego one day, but then the next day you wake up and you're like, "Oh yes, I'm free of my ego. I killed my ego yesterday," which is just more of an egotistical thought, like you're more spiritually advanced somehow because you killed your ego. Well, you can't do that. The ego is a function of the mind. It is the problem solver. So the ego analyzes every situation, every object, and it makes comparisons, it makes measurements, it quantifies things, it judges them as being good or bad or big or small or right or wrong. And then we take that feedback information and then we can make judgments and associations or even create more stories about that. So the ego's job primarily is analyzing and problem solving. If the ego doesn't have a problem to solve in the moment, then it will look for a problem or it will create a problem. So by going into the past, by thinking of something that didn't work out right, or maybe we made some mistake, or it will go into our fears and anticipations or apprehensions of the future. So the ego's job primarily is problem solving in the moment. And if you don't have a problem, then great, good for you, but keep your ego in check. So one way to do that is through yoga asana, doing a physical practice, by doing pranayama, conscious breath work, by doing mantra, keeping the mind engaged wherever you are. You can do mantra yoga all the time, anywhere, at all times. You can do it internally. Nobody has to know you're working the mala beads and that you're engaged in prayer. So Andhaka's blood, every time it hit the ground, a new Andhaka would be born. which again symbolizes the proliferation of the ego, the spreading of egoic energy, and that you can't kill the ego with force. So if we have negative energy within us, it's not by being more disciplined or being hard or chopping heads that we're able to suppress or get rid of egoic or negative energies. But instead, we engage in spiritual practices. So when Shiva realized that more of these Andhakas were being created and he couldn't just defeat him so easily, then he called upon the Matrikas, the goddess warriors. So these warriors came, and every time that blood was about to come down, they would drink up the blood and they would lick his wounds. And eventually, he was about to fall in battle. But they said, hey, you don't have to die, you can join us. And so he realized the error of his ways, his own personal mistakes, and he joined the Ganas, the devotees of Shiva. So again, he represents the egoic energy, and even in the myth, the egoic energy is not killed. Instead, it is transformed into something that honors the divine presence and the supreme consciousness. And it was able to transform by calling upon the energies of the goddess. So the Matrikas, there are said to be around 50 of those to represent one letter of the Sanskrit alphabet. So it's all of the letters together that create all the different mantras, and it's through the power of mantra, of spoken word, of honoring the divine, that we can transform the negative egoic energies into life-affirming energies. That is the story of Shiva and his third eye, of how he acquired it from Adi Parashakti, and also how it was created by Parvati covering his eyes. I hope you enjoyed the stories. I hope they serve you on your path. Om Namah Shivaya.